against us there, albeit we all felt, the players themselves felt they should have done better. But we certainly rallied in Trent Bridge, but let us serve us down in one session or a crazy 40 minutes. Really with the game set up and us looking like we could get in position to do what, again, we've done before. We did it in Bangladesh, scoring over 400 to win a series away from home. Obviously we had a fantastic result in Brisbane, so we felt we had the confidence and track record of these players having at least done it before in Ghana win.
And from being in the Caribbean during the Men's T20 World Cup, it was brilliant to see the fan engagement and those carnival atmospheres in the stands. If you cast your mind back to the Gabba Test match in February, the incredible feats of Shamar Joseph when he burst onto the scene, is it possible to say what the impact of, it's not only Shamar, but mainly Shamar, that final day performance, has it been a Shamar Joseph effect, would you say?
I think there has been. I think that's one of the things that always surprises me, that despite not necessarily matches happening at prime time or matches being well attended, I don't think there were a huge amount of people even in the Gabba when Shamar bowled Australia out, but everyone was talking about it, everyone knew it, and certainly when Shamar came back to Guyana, there was almost a 3-day party where he was paraded around Georgetown and all the fans were able to show their love, but even everyone was still talking about it now as such a proud moment. And I think because of the way he performed, the fact that he was relatively unknown and come through such a sort of untraditional pathway, the fact that it's pro-Olympic and Russian quality, it was an art performance where he could do that all and then to come out and bowl the way he did, it was a fairy tale start really, taking Steve Smith with his first wicket and then finishing in such style at the Gabba that it really did. I said the other day that whilst West Indies doesn't bring necessarily any financial rewards to the game, it does bring some incredible stories and some amazing players, and I think Shamar sort of embodies that.
Johnny, it's been great to catch up. We've cantered through a lot of topics in a short space of time, but thank you so much for being with us on Stumps.
Absolute pleasure.
So that was the CEO of West Indies Cricket, Johnny Grave. Sunil and Jim, it was a very informative chat, I felt. Sunil, who spoke about the importance of the big three touring the West Indies and how nations are still so reliant on that financially, which sort of doesn't strike me as a terribly sustainable way to move forward. Can you see that ever changing?
Well, not in the foreseeable future, quite honestly. If you look at what happened in the T20 World Cup, the audiences in almost all the US locations were from the subcontinent, largely Indian. It was largely a blue sea out there. And we know that, Indians form the largest diaspora in the world, at least one of them. And it's indeed in the US where they hop over to the West Indies to go and watch cricket. Because cricket is so much a part of our life. It really is. And I cannot tell you, it's almost the point of being obsessive about cricket. And that is why wherever there's a cricket match being played, Indians will flock, especially if the national team is playing. And that's why I think that India, certainly, England, of course, we talk about TV audiences, and Australia, because being the big three in the ICC as well, touring the West Indies, will be there for some time. Until, and this is the other part of it, the other teams seek to reach that level. South Africa, I think, will be able to get there, but they don't have the diaspora, they don't have the people coming and watching. As indeed, when we go to South Africa, you'll see quite a few empty stadiums where there are other teams coming in and playing. So I think that has got to be addressed, and perhaps this T20 World Cup would have addressed just a bit of it. But yes, in the foreseeable future, I see that these three teams touring will really be the lifeblood financially of West Indies cricket.
Unless, of course, as Johnny Grave was saying, he's hopeful in that 27 to 31 cycle, there might be a change to that revenue sharing around bilateral tours, so that perhaps teams like West Indies, Sri Lanka, or all teams will also make some money when they go abroad, not just relying on having those big teams come to their shores. Jim, I had to touch on the Gabba with him to try and understand just what impact that has had, and it was momentous for Shamar Joseph, but for all cricket fans around the world, you got that sense of sort of combined joy at watching that incredible performance and seeing that resurgence and what it meant for the region. It was pointed, he said, didn't he, that whilst West Indies cricket doesn't necessarily bring big financial rewards to the game, it does bring incredible stories and amazing players, and that is still important, isn't it, for the soul of the game?
My word, as we talked the other And let's face it, they've got a mainly inexperienced batting lineup. There's not a lot of lengthy test careers in those fellas. And you know, on the fringe, you've got, as I mentioned to Brian Lara a few weeks ago, the Shy Hope and Nicholas Pooran, who apparently don't want to play test cricket. So you want to have all hands on deck when things are running for you. They had a brilliant, maybe one-off achievement at the Gabba, thanks to that extraordinary bowling performance from Shamar Joseph. But can they sustain that over a period of time? And certainly, as we heard in that chat with Johnny Gray, they were very much underprepared for the test match played at Lord's. That didn't help their cause. But there are good signs there for them being a competitive and hungry team from the look of a lot of the cricket they played the other day. Oh, they got a bit more to come. So let's hope that that's the case. But I don't think there's any doubt that the world of cricket will be sustained by the big three financially, unless we get franchises taking the game over to such an extent that test cricket gets squeezed out completely. You know, in another 10 years, maybe the 100 will be part of that too. That may well be the case for a lot of countries. We'll only be left with the hardcore 4 or 6 teams at the top that will be playing it. But at the moment, we've got to try and find a way, unlike most other sports, to manage the year and fit all these games in. And let's hope it can be sustained as an attractive event, which is certainly the case wherever India play.
Well, Johnny Gray had, of course, been at the ICC's annual conference, which took place last weekend in Colombo, Sri Lanka. That's where representatives from all of the 108 member nations come together. The ICC released a statement afterwards listing a number of decisions that were made across the course of the conference and at board level, although just as pertinent are the matters which are absent from that statement. So firstly, no mention of the Champions Trophy being hosted by Pakistan next February, so no addressing publicly at least what will happen around India's participation given the political standoff between the two countries, and no mention of Afghanistan's women and their request for support to form a refugee team. Now, the ICC, it has to be pointed out, is a collective of national chairs and chief executives, and at that top level, across countries and different cultures, it is a sad reality that there aren't enough individuals, leaders of the game, who care enough about these women in cricket. So having had to flee their country due to the Taliban, they are ignored once again, and the team to date have had no response or acknowledgement to the letter they sent to Greg Barkley. So what has been decided? Well, the Women's T20 World Cup will expand from 10 teams this October in Bangladesh to 12 teams in 2026, before expanding again to 16 in 2030. Which, Jim, when you look at that, we say, well, that's a positive, it's investment in the game, but there are sort of pros and cons to this, aren't there? And I'm still getting some feeling there is a bit of nervousness from some in women's cricket as to whether the global game is quite ready for this expansion just yet, or whether it will be ready.
Well, you can answer the question, Ali. If we've got enough teams who are competitive at the back end, we have in men's cricket, you know, we know that they can sustain some kind of performance in the first round, and then more than likely they move out when we get to the next round. And they've also got to have 2 or 3 games a day to get through the schedule. It takes too long, that's the other point. But yeah, they have to make some critical examination and have a benchmark. I don't know how you do it about the quality of the teams that are going to be playing up. Otherwise, it becomes a bit of a meaningless exercise. The teams are getting resolved for 50 runs, not for 10, so we don't want that. But look, if there's a future for the game expanding beyond the current boundaries, which are not just Commonwealth countries these days, then this is a good step here.
Yeah, you've got to create space for teams to move into, haven't you? Otherwise there's a ceiling and there is never that opportunity. I mean, there is still at the moment, it feels like there is quite a gap between those at the very top of the game, which might only be, you know, 4 countries: India, England, Australia, South Africa kind of there and thereabouts. New Zealand were quite poor competition for England in the recent series they've played just now. They've got to hope that there can be, and there is an acceleration of development between now and those expansion years, so that, yeah, you still get that competition, you're not diluting the quality, but actually you're still providing an opportunity for some incredible results and perhaps upsets like we saw USA, really come to the fore and create a moment in this World Cup. And sometimes, it might only be one match, one moment, but it sends a bit of a shockwave and some shivers and some inspiration back to that country as well. This is Stumped from the BBC World Service. I'm Alison Mitchell, and if you've missed anything from Stumped, then you can download and subscribe to the podcast via your usual podcast provider. And why not check us out on YouTube? Head to the BBC World Service YouTube channel. On last week's show, we spoke to UAE women's captain Isha Oza, who spoke to us about the influence of their coach, the former UAE men's captain Ahmed Raza.
He's played a lot of international cricket and he's watched a lot of women's games as well. So he can guide us from both ways, like a overall cricketing perspective as well as a women's cricket perspective. So that's really helped us. I think it's helped us grow our game and make it more T20 friendly, I could say, from what we used to play.
From the BBC World Service, this is Stumped on ABC Ashburn.
Finally, on Stumped, India's men are entering a new era as Vikram Gambhir begins his role as head coach of the men's team this week. He starts with the white ball series away to Sri Lanka. So then what has the reaction been in India to his appointment?
Yeah, if you look at his credentials, he has the credentials. There's no question. He's been an international cricketer for well over a decade. He's been a World Cup winner twice. And of course, he's coached and played for KKR. He's been their mentor in 2024, but they actually won the IPL as well. I think actually he will be a very different sort of person for Rahul Dravid because he has a bit of a fiery temper. We all know that. I think that's not a bad thing. I really don't think it's a bad thing because I think there are a lot of youngsters in the team that need a little bit of putting in order, but just keeping their discipline going. Rahul Dravid had a very different way of doing it. I think with his mentorship with KKR, he would have learned a few things about how to deal with different types of people. I think that would have been a good start. Of course, he's been around, he's been playing cricket as well, about 8 or 10 years ago. So it's not that he's been out of the game for such a long time. He's played his players in the team. He's played with them across different IPL teams as well, not just Delhi, which is his Ranji Trophy team. And therefore, I think that he would be well accepted. I think he's made all the right noises so far. I think that's an important part of it. And he has the backing of the selection committee. Rajiv Albert are fully behind him. And I think that it'll be there. But as I said right at the beginning, people are going to be watching this tour in Sri Lanka for how it's going to pan out in terms of the net levels of the optics. How is that going to be?
I mean, Jim, Dravid's shoes are pretty big ones to fill, aren't they?
Well, the one thing he can look forward to, even at this point, is that India are probably going to play in the WTC next year at Lord's, probably against Australia, unless England buckle up their shoes and stop bowling 80 overs in a day in the World Test Championship. But, he's got new personalities and he's like you in the one days and principally Coley and Rocket and give it away. So he's got to develop some leadership in the team and get that harmony right for what lies ahead. And it's a pretty big challenge, I would have thought, playing 5 Test matches in Australia. But then you think about the resilience of India a few years back when Kohli went over and they still won the series after being bowled out for 36 in Adelaide. So there's a bit of a core with this Indian side, and of course they've had quite a bit of success, which gives them confidence. And to my mind, in Bumrah, they have one of the great strike bowlers in the current game. He's a huge asset. So there are lots of positives about it. It's really just pulling it into line and getting satisfying performance from players who really want to play at this level most of the time, because it's hard to concentrate on a tour here, a tour there, nipping off to the franchise, back to the IPL, and so it goes. But I was interested also, Sunil, to see that he spent some time in politics in the party in the country. So he's not only, well, he was ranked number 1 cricketer in the world 15 years ago, the number 1 batsman, and he's had leadership experience too, briefly with India. So there's a lot of plus, but like anything that changes, there'll be some issues about trying to make it
player Harmony Sunil? Is he going to have to call upon his political acumen for his rapport with Virat Kohli? Say they have had a tumultuous relationship in the past, but is that all in the past?
Yeah, they're both Delhi boys. They both been in Delhi Run trophy teams, so they didn't know each other. And I think he said absolutely the right thing. He said all that's the TRPs, the IPL, the spirit is up, the blood is running fast and all that sort of thing. You say a couple of words, but he said these things. He says he's a professional, I'm a professional, and he knows the value that Virat brings to the table. Virat has nothing more to prove. I mean, if you look at where he is in his career and what he's done, he doesn't have to prove anything to anybody. But I think that what they're looking at will know the value that he brings to the team. And Virat, being a consummate professional, will not let those personal things spill out over into the field. What happened in the dressing room is a separate thing. I think he's now a bit into his Zen period, if you know what I mean. Virat Kohli. He won't let these things affect him. And as Jim so rightly said, I mean, both of the peers have got a couple of things to do. So he's not going to stir the pot unnecessarily. He's not going to.
Well, let's hope all Indian fans will be hoping a new coaching era means continued success and some more silverware, of course. Well, that is all we've got time for on this week's Stumped. My thanks to Jim Maxwell and to Sunil Gupta and to all of you for listening, and we'll speak to you again next week. Until then, bye for now.
Stumped is a BBC sport production for the BBC World Service in association with NBC and Akashvani. This is the BBC World Service with the story of the Nazis' attempt to wipe out the Romani people. What started as persecution became a genocide by the end of the Second World War. But what happened is much less known than the Jewish Holocaust. Survivors, activists and historians have been fighting to be heard. The Romani Holocaust, an unfinished history, at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries or wherever you get your BBC podcasts. In 50 minutes, witness history.
Taking it back to 1974 and the launch of a revolutionary new method for transporting medicines which paved the way for millions around the world to be vaccinated against previously deadly diseases.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
On the Apple Mixtape with me, Mubin Azar, the story of a family on the run from one of Russia's most powerful politicians after leaking secrets.
I just knew it was the right thing to take this information with me. I just copied a lot of information onto 3 different USB hard drives, and then I literally smashed the computers up and the hard drives inside the computers and dumped them.
And then there's also Hitler Torres. As a teenager, he'd already spent years studying to fulfill his role as a Buddhist Lama. That's until he got a taste for more carnal ways to spend his time.
So I did in fact kissed her, and then she told me, she was like, hey, I want to show you how to kiss. And that for me was just like, I was in absolute paradise. I was like floating for 2 weeks. I was like floating, so happy.
The choice cut from Outlook on the Mixtape after the World Service News.
The Paris Olympics has opened with a grand display of French culture and heritage, and the world's top athletes sailing down the river Seine in heavy rain. Bridges and riverbanks were used as catwalks, stages and grandstands. The president of the Paris Games, 3-time Olympic champion Tony Estanguet, welcomed the athletes to the French capital.
We want every sport and every Olympian to make this city their home. So welcome home. Welcome to Paris. Welcome to your moment in history. Live it, love it, and carry us with you. The world is on your side.
Performances by Pink Feather Lady Gaga and the French marble singer Ina Nakamura. The combination of the show included Celine Dion standing in a spectacular role on the Eiffel Tower, singing an emotional rendition of Edith Piaf's In Amour. These people braved the rain to watch the ceremony.
We spent like all day waiting for this moment, and all this month waiting for this moment. Unfortunately, the rain, and we have some issues with the organization also, because we were expecting like more space for everyone. But anyways, we're happy to be here. We're happy that finally the Olympic Games are starting now.
nomination of Kamala Harris at a Christian conservative political conference amid signs that the race for the White House is tightening. In a vitriolic hour-long address to the Believers Summit in Florida, Mr. Trump described his likely opponent in November's election as a radical liberal and mocked the pronunciation of her name. But he went further.
She was a bum 3 weeks ago. She was a bum. A failed vice president in a failed administration with millions of people crossing, and she was the border czar. Now they're trying to say she never was the border czar. She had nothing to do with the border. She was the border czar.
Opinion polls suggest that Mr. Trump's lead in the presidential election campaign has narrowed since Joe Biden pulled out. A wildfire that has destroyed a third of the buildings in the tourist town of Jasper in the Canadian Rockies is still burning out of control. Hundreds of firefighters are tackling the blaze, which created a wall of fire 100 metres high. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith said rain and cooler temperatures helped to subdue the spread of the fire. President Biden has spoken by phone to King Abdullah of Jordan about his continuing efforts to reach a ceasefire in Gaza and to secure the release of hostages. Jordanian authorities said the king stressed the need to ensure the delivery of aid to Palestinians. There are reports that the CIA chief will take part in renewed ceasefire talks in Rome on Sunday with his Egyptian and Israeli counterparts, as well as Qatar's Prime Minister. Live from London, you're listening to the latest world news from the BBC. Panama has accused Venezuela of blocking a flight carrying former Latin American leaders to observe Venezuela's presidential election on Sunday. Panamanian President Jose Raul Mulino said Venezuela allowed the flight to go ahead only after the former leaders agreed to get off the plane. Here's Leonardo Rocha.
What President Maduro is telling very clearly is that he's not going to be intimidated, and he's not going to allow in Venezuela people who he deems as hostile to Venezuela or unfair. The European Union observers, for example, they were uninvited because of economic sanctions that have been going on for a long time. And then you had the former president of Argentina, former ally of President Maduro, Alberto Fernandez, was also uninvited. But there will be many other organizations there observing the elections. You have 2 Latin American and Caribbean organizations. You have UN observers, the African Union.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Laos at the start of a 6-country tour of Asia aimed at reasserting American leadership in the region. Myanmar and tensions in the South China Sea are high on the agenda, even the day after his Russian and Chinese counterparts had their own meeting with ministers in Laos. Moscow said Russia and China were drawing up plans for a new security architecture in Eurasia. A court in the US state of Missouri has ordered a healthcare company to pay almost $500 million in compensation and damages after its specialized formula for premature babies was linked to bowel disease. The verdict against Abbott Laboratories included the first of what's expected to be many more claims over the formula lodged in courts around the country. Abbott Laboratories said it would try to have the verdict overturned. G20 finance ministers meeting in Rio de Janeiro have agreed in principle to try to make the global super rich pay their taxes. The gathering stopped short of backing proposals by Brazil for a minimum tax on the wealthiest individuals. BBC News.
Hello, this is Outlook's Mixtape, a curated collection of highlights from this week's run of shows. I'm Mubin Azar, and I'll be your guide to this selection of stories from around the globe. First up, how far would you go to protect your family? British builder Nick Stride went to the ends of the earth when he felt he and his loved ones could be in danger after getting too close to one of Russia's most powerful men. You see, whilst working on building a huge $140 million mansion for longtime Putin ally and first Deputy Prime Minister of Russia, Igor Shuvalov, Nick witnessed what he believed to be financial corruption, something Shuvalov has always strenuously denied. As the only Westerner on the project, Nick felt like his and his young family's every move was being watched. Asia Fuchs picks up the story.
Did you and Luda, were you able to talk freely at home?
No, we never spoke about anything at home. I mean, I don't know if we're being monitored at home or not, but it's, you know, if there's a 10% chance we're not going to talk, so if we were going to talk about work, it would have been outside in the park somewhere.
The stress and paranoia were ramping up. Imperceptible at first, then all-consuming. Nick didn't want to be part of a system he saw as corrupt. He wanted out, but his visa status was complicated. He was having to go back to the UK and renew every few months. But one day, protocol changed.
I went to see the class representative for Tali. I said I'm back to do a visa run. He just looked at me and he said, the kids aren't leaving Russia. They're not going. And then I said to Luda, this is it now. We're just, our lives are completely being controlled by the Russians.
And from that moment on, what did you realize you guys had to do?
We had to get out. We were looking at maybe going over the border into Ukraine and just paying our way to get over there. But if we were stopped trying to do that would have meant the end.
Nick and Luda talked it over and came up with a plan. Nick kept asking his superiors in vain for a Russian passport so that no one would doubt his allegiance to the country. And when a job came up working for the client in the far east of Russia, Nick said he'd do it. But first, he said, he'd need to take the family back to the UK to tie up their affairs and be back on the following Monday. That's when they'd make their escape. There would be no going back.
We couldn't tell anyone, not even Michael Nanya, and certainly not anyone like my parents or risk anything like that. So we left basically with just the clothes that we stood in, so that if we were stopped at the airport, we'd just say, oh look, we're just doing exactly what we said we're doing, we're going back to the UK, we'll be back in a couple of days. So I always remember Michael telling me that the day we left, he put all his school books out on his bed and everything ready for the school, in a couple of days' time on the Monday. And I remember thinking, like, you're never going to see that school again.
How did you feel on that plane as you lifted off?
I remember going through customs thinking, if we get caught now, who knows what's going to come to us. And I remember thinking, don't look nervous. Going through, just try and act normal, which was very difficult. We knew we had one shot at getting out. When we were on that airplane to the UK, we just thought, yeah, we've done it. Now we just got to make sure nothing happens to us. So when we got to the UK, I bought 4 tickets to Australia because the Russians are obviously going to be very annoyed that I left, and I would want them to think I've just gone back to the UK. So when we got to London, we stayed there for 2 or 3 days until we managed to get a flight to Australia. And the reason going to Australia, in the UK, I'd always be looking over my shoulder and I'd always be a threat to him. So our plan was just to go to Australia and just, be as far away as possible.
So you thought London, the UK, he had properties here, he and his people were going to be in and out of London, it wouldn't be safe?
I certainly wasn't hanging about in the UK. I'm a nobody, and nobodies when they disappear. No one cares, no one knows about it.
The family kept the lowest of profiles while they waited for their flights. No calls to family or friends. They holed up in a hotel near London's Heathrow Airport with only short trips to bring back food. Nick also had another side mission to keep the financial information he'd had access to safe.
I just knew it was the right thing to take this information with me. I just copied a lot of information onto 3 different USB hard drives, and then I literally smashed the computers up and the hard drives inside the computers and dumped them, and I posted 2 flash drives off to what I knew were secure locations, and I took 1 flash drive with me. It just seemed the right thing to do.
For now though, Nick wanted to get as far away as he could. He and the family landed in the subtropical heat of Brisbane on the 8th of October, 2010. But a day later, Nick received a phone call.
And I didn't recognise the voice actually, but he seemed to know that, that was it, I was gone, and he started swearing and threatening, and I just put the phone down. After about a minute, it rang back, and then he was going crazy. So I just switched the phone off, I undone the back of the phone, took the SIM card out, threw the SIM card away, and I said to Luna, that's it, no emails, no phone calls, we're just gonna forget about them.
And were you able to shake that fear off?
when in Australia you're travelling around the coast and you're that far away, it all felt so different. It all felt so new, and it was like my mind was just completely blocking anything really of my past out. So for like 6 months I really, my care was with my family. So I didn't care about Russians coming looking for me. My care was to make sure that my kids were enjoying themselves, and that's what we concentrated on doing.
But in March 2011, you decided to apply for asylum in Australia. Why?
We're in Perth, and I said to Luda, this is it now. We got to hand ourselves into immigration before the visa runs out, and we'll just tell them who we are, where we come from, what's happened, and we'll just put our lives in their hands. That was the option that we took, was to apply for political asylum.
Immigration turned their application down. Nick says he and the children faced being sent back to the UK and Lula to Russia, since she had overstayed her visa when giving birth in the UK. They would be split up.
It would have been an absolute disaster. We wouldn't have seen Luda again, and there's no way, could I go back to Russia, but they were determined to send Luda back to Russia. And this went on, and Luda just burst into tears. She didn't stop crying for a week.
The future seemed dark, one in which the family couldn't count on staying together. Nick had to come up with a way out. The next step was an appeal to the Refugee Review Tribunal, or RRT. It took months, and despite the strain hanging over them, Nick's family were mostly able to carry on with their lives. Nick and his wife Lula could work. They rented an apartment in Bunbury, south of Perth in Western Australia. Their children Michael and Anya were thriving in school, they were making friends, and Molly the dog completed the family unit. Meanwhile, Nick had been keeping an eye on what was going on back in Russia. He came across an article on Chvala by American investigative journalist and Russia expert Michael Weiss.
I contacted him. I said, look, I might have some evidence that you'd find useful.
What drove you to contact him?
Luda's family's in Russia. My friends are in Russia. And these politicians, they just take so much, and I was actually part of that system. If my son was witness to a crime, I'd expect him to stand up for himself and do something about it. It doesn't matter who it is. I knew when I gave the information, I knew what it meant to my family. I thought I'd just let him have a look at it, see what he says. And he phoned me back and he said, Jesus, send me everything you got. And, me and Luda, we had a huge long talk about it. And, Luda never had any access to the information, that only I ever saw it. But she was 100% committed to doing the right thing as well. So we decided to send the information, obviously not paid for anything, we just gave him the information and let him do what he wanted with that information.
Now two parallel lines in Nick's life were running, set to converge somewhere down the track. The first, the information he'd given to Michael Weiss was going to come out, and even though he was using an alias, Nick had little doubt that Chuvala's people would know he was the source. The other, the decision on their future in Australia from the asylum review. They waited, and then a brown envelope came through the mail.
In the review tribunal, in their results, they actually said we had a justifiable fear of harm. And that is normally enough for immigration to grant us asylum. But they chose not to. Immigration Perth chose not to do that. And they said basically we got another 2 weeks to leave the country.
Like Nick says, though the review agreed they had a justifiable fear of harm were they to return to the UK or Russia, they were told their case did not reach the threshold for political asylum. It was a crushing blow. It meant the family was facing being split up once again.
Me and Luda, we drove down to a place called Back Beach. It was night time, evening time. We sat in the car and we just screamed. Didn't feel like there was anything else to do. And Luda turned around to me and said, promise me you won't let them take my kids away. And I promised her that wasn't going to happen.
Nick was doing everything he could to keep the family together, grasping at straws, begging ministers to intervene. But they were running out of